Yesterday we had spoken about the kindling of the menorah, and then the Torah speaks about its exactly how was it constructed. And the Torah makes it a point on Pasuk Dalid, Ze Masa Menorah Miksha, Zov Miksha. So Rashi said, what's Miksha? It was one block of gold and was hammered out of that one block of gold. It was not made of separate parts and they were soldered together, but rather Miksha means it was hit. It was hammered out, and all the various parts of it were hammered out from one piece of gold. So over here, the Sefarno explains what is the symbolism of one entity. It was one entity. So he says that Tachlis Batzmo, Hamachuvan Badlokas Haneros, El Mupnei Menorah. He explained earlier that the menorah is the center shank, the center light, and you have three lights on the stems to the right and to the left, and all the wicks point to the center. So we'd spoken that the two components of the Jewish people, those who were committed only to Torah study, and there were others similar to the Zvulun, which provides the material for the Yisachar. So they're able to study, they support the spiritual entity of the Jewish people. And they're all, the lights, the wicks are facing the center, to indicate clearly it's not for the diffusement of the light, but the focus is the center, meaning the intent of the ones on the right and on the left, or there's one intent, only to do the will of Hashem, and whatever it takes to do the will of God, they're committed to that. So this represents Achdus. Achdus means the unity of the Jewish people. We're all committed to function in one capacity. So that's Echod. So Miksha is one entity, and as the wicks themselves face the center, and he had said earlier, this was the Nasav Nishma. At Sinai, there were all kinds of Jews at Sinai, and they all said Nasav Nishma. We're all in this together. We just need the charge, and we do it together. That's the Achdus, because they're serving Hashem. There's a word from Rabbi Simcha of Dvinsk. We read earlier that there was a formation when the camps traveled in the desert. There were 4 camps. Each camp was comprised of 3 tribes. And the center camp was Machne Shechina. That was the center camp. And so what was the nucleus of the Jewish people? That was Machne Shechina. That was the camp of the Shechina. And they all encircled the center camp to indicate that what unifies the Jewish people is our belief, our commitment, and our attachment to Hashem. It's the same idea. It's similar to the wicks to the right and to the left face the center to indicate that the intent is the same intent, regardless if you come from the right or the left. There's a beautiful word from the Netziv. Netziv is Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh of Volozhin in Lithuania, and he has a commentary on Chumash. It's called Hamek Dover. That's his commentary. And in the opening of every one of the Chumashim, he has an introduction. And Bereshis, he cites a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara cites a verse in Yoshua and Joshua that the book of Bereshis is referred to as Sefer HaYoshar, the book of the Yeshorim, the book of the straight ones. And the Gemara asks, who are the Yeshorim? Who are they? The Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, they were Yeshorim. And therefore, Yoshua ben Nun refers to the book of Bereshis as Sefer HaYoshar, because the majority of the book is involved in speaking about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So therefore, it's Sefer HaYoshar. So the Netziv goes to explain, we find there a number of classifications of special people. We know we're familiar with tzaddik, we're familiar with chosid, but what exactly is Yosher? He's a straight person, proper, appropriate. What is appropriate, straight, chosid, tzaddik? So he goes to explain, tzaddik is a person who does everything correctly. That's tzaddik. Chosid, as we studied in the Mesilas Yesharim, and as the Rambam says, when you go beyond the call of duty, that's chosid. Based on the rational, objective approach This should be my level of obligation. The Chassid says, although I know I'm not bound beyond this point, I choose to go beyond that point. That's Chassid. It's referred to as Lifnim Rishus Hadin. I go beyond the call of duty. But what is Yosher? It's interesting. We say every Shabbos in the Psukei de Zimra, we cite a verse in Tehillim where David says, Pekudei Hashem Yishorim Mesamchei Lev. The dictates of Hashem are Yishorim. They're appropriate, straight, fair, and therefore they bring joy to the heart. Because the Yishorim, the dictates of Hashem, Mesamchei Lev, brings joy to the heart. What is one thing you have to do another? Why? Because the Yishorim, therefore, when we engage in them, we live our lives according to the dictates of the Torah, it brings joy to the heart, and we study the Torah. So what I had once said, we find there's a verse in Koheles where Shlomo Melech says that initially God made Adam Yashar. When he created Adam, he was Yashar, fully functional. His perception and his purview of life was appropriate with fairness as God had instructed him. However, Bikshu Chishbonus Rabim. They went and they made all kinds of calculations to justify a behavior which was not acceptable. Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, although he heard directly from Hashem, from all the fruits of the tree you may eat, and from this tree you should not eat, he crossed that line. How did he cross the line? You couldn't have had a greater level of clarity than Adam pre-sin the Garden of Eden. So how did he somehow rationalize to cross the line? So there's a famous word from the Arizal that the Arizal says, we read in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Tzara Agra, that when one engages in serving Hashem, the greater the difficulty, the greater the challenge, the greater is the value of that action. Why? Because it shows a greater level of dedication. Pre-sin, the discernment between good and evil was obviously clear. It was black and white. If you allow that fruit to enter into a system, which is tov v'ra, the evil, you become conflicted. It's like a person takes a drug, and once the drug enters into the system and you crave for whatever that is, you lose your level of clarity. Adam wanted to be in the position that it should not be black and white. There should be a degree of gray. There should be a certain degree of ambiguity. So the challenge should be greater. And a result of the challenge being greater, when he succeeds, the value of his success is going to be a greater value of success. That was the rationale why he had the tree of knowledge. Because at the end result will be greater than if you function within the capacity of black and white without being tainted with evil. But that was the sin. He originally was Adam. Atem kruyim Adam. Adam means you're meant to function in this capacity and be productive. Bikshu cheshbonos rabos. You sought out, you made all kinds of calculations to justify a different approach, and you damage yourself. And therefore you forfeited your classification of Adam, and you're no longer called Adam. Who assumed that position of Adam? So we cite always the verse in Yechezkel, Atem kruyim Adam, hem lo kruyim Adam. The classification of Jewish people is Adam. Meaning we are in that position to be able to advance ourselves and be productive within the spiritual realm. Atem kruyim Adam. And so what does Shlomo says? How did God create Adam? He created him Yosher. His essence is Yosher. It's fully functional within the spiritual realm. His system functions. So for the system to function properly, what do you need to infuse that system with something which is also Yosher? So that's what David Melech says. Pekudei Hashem Yishorim Mesamchei Lev. The dictates of Hashem are Yishorim. They're appropriate, they're fair, and therefore they bring joy to the heart of the Jew when he studies Torah. Why? Because since the essence of the Jew is Yosher, because Adam is Yosher, that's the way God created Adam, Yosher. Therefore, when we're infused with something which is Yosher, we've come upon our essence. And when you come upon your essence, it brings a level of joy. And that's what David is saying, Kudei Hashem Yishorim, because the dictates of Hashem are Yosher, are Yishorim. Therefore, it's Mesamchi Lev, it brings joy to the heart. But what exactly is Yishorim? So this is what the Netziv speaks about. What are Yishorim? So he goes to explain that we find, if you read about the Avos HaKadoshim, that Avram had a relationship with his nephew Lot. And in terms of his behavior, the way he behaved, Avram should have turned his back on him and just had nothing to do with him. But yet he made a covenant with him that if, when they separated, and Avram says to Lot, if you go to the right, I will go to the left. And if I go to the left, you go to the left, I will go to the right, but I'm always there for you. Even though he chose to go to a location, to Sodom, which represented everything evil, nevertheless, he went and he saved him. He went to battle against the four mightiest kings. And after that, he was concerned he may have actually depleted all his merits. Then Lot went back there again. After he saved him, went back again. And again, Sodom is being destroyed. In the Menorah, Avram prays for these people. Sodom, the Sodomites, what they represent was the antithesis of what Avram represented. When God told them they're going to be destroyed, he enters into a dialogue with him. Maybe the 50 tzaddikim, maybe the 45 tzaddikim, till God says it's hopeless, there's no tzaddikim. But Avram left no stone unturned to try to be the advocate for Sodom, that they should not be destroyed. Yitzchak, he goes and he's in the community of the Philistines, Plishtim, and he goes and it's famine year, and he plants, and he has 100 yield filled. And Avimelech, the Philistine king, drives him out of the community. He says, you're creating problems for us. And later, Avimelech goes and says, yeah, I want to make a covenant with you. So Yitzchak says, here you treat me like a pariah, like an outcast, and you push me out of your community, and now you want a covenant? But he made a covenant. Yaakov Avinu had a financial agreement with his father-in-law, and he cheated him 100 times. We find Yaakov never shared this with his wives. Could you imagine? Your father every day stabs you in the back and turns the knife, and he cuts you into pieces, and he's always demanding. You know what it means not to share it with your wives, with the daughters of your father-in-law. When did he finally share it with them? After being there 20 years, and God comes to him in a prophecy, he says, it's time to go back. So Yaakov now is the first time he divulges to his wives and reveals to them how dishonest his wife was, their father was, how he was cheated, how he was tortured, and what level of dedication he offered his father, but he never shared it until then. But he should have, he could have. Yosher means that you're able to rise above conflict of interest and be totally objective and only act when you must act. That's Yosher. That's being a person straight. You know, you say a person is as straight as an arrow expression. So he goes to explain that Bayis Sheni, why was it destroyed? The second base of Mikdash. So Gemara says because of sinas chinim, unwarranted hate. Was it just plain unwarranted hate? He says during Bayis Sheni, what was the challenge? Gemara tells us in Yuma that during the first base of Mikdash, the challenge for the Jew was idolatry. And it ravaged Jewish people, and ultimately that did them in. And the beginning of the Second Temple period, the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the men of the High Assembly, they fasted 100 fasts to destroy the evil inclination for idolatry. And the Gemara tells us that the desire for idolatry was all-consuming, even more than the sexual desire. Only after they destroyed the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination for idolatry, the Jews were able to contend with that evil. So what was the new challenge? The new challenge was the Sadducees, where they rejected the oral interpretation of the Torah. The Tzdukim, the Prushim that Tzdukim, and that was the challenge. So now, what's sinas chinam? He says, do you think it's just unwarranted hate. No. Everything was l'shem shamayim. Everything's for the sake of God. Meaning, let's say if two Jews had a disagreement. What was a halachic position? And one didn't agree with the other one. So how did the other one see the other one? If you don't agree with me in my type of Judaism, although it's rooted in the fundamentals of Torah, you're a Sadducee. So therefore, in their minds, when they despise the other Jew, they believed they were doing a mitzvah. But in reality, there was no basis. They had no right to despise the other person because maybe they're both right. Both of them were correct. We say the Shivim Panim LaTorah, the 70 approaches to the Torah. We're not saying whether something is permitted or not permitted. What's the approach? What's the perspective? Maybe both perspectives are right. Maybe it's based on the individualism of the people. That's what it's based upon. Now, they immediately, they concluded, if you don't accept my position, you're a Sadducee. And so therefore, they never did tshuva. Because they believed when they were against, and whatever it was, whatever battles they fought, they were battles for Hashem. So what they thought was a mitzvah was really baseless. This is similar with the Chofetz Chaim writes in the laws of Lashon Hara. As I mentioned the other day, Chofetz Chaim shows that over time, if you don't study the laws and you're not careful, you can be in violation of 14 positive commandments and 17 negative commandments. One of the positive commandments is B'tzedek tishbar misecho. You have to give your fellow the benefit of the doubt. In certain situations, what happens? You see something, witness an event, and you should give him the benefit of the doubt, which would indicate he's not a Rasha. But you, for whatever reason, you don't give him the benefit of the doubt. As a result of that, you misclassify that person as a Rasha, and therefore you say, because he's a Rasha, I have to destroy him. And I have to speak and divulge to the world how evil he is. And you spill the beans, everything negative you can say about the person you say. Every word that comes out of the man's mouth, what is it? It's Lashon Hara. Because it's based on false foundation, because initially, if he would have given that person the benefit of the doubt, he wouldn't see the person as negative light. It's only because he went off the cliff, he misjudged him, which he had no right to misjudge him. That's why he speaks Lashon Hara. That's sinas chinam. Sinas chinam means you believe you're a tzaddik. You believe you're doing a mitzvah. But the original foundation for your perspective is faulty. And because it's faulty, therefore the whole house collapses. And that's the sinas chinam. The book of Bereshis is called Sefer Yesharim, because despite the conflicts, the Avos HaKadoshim were able to rise above those conflicts and be fully objective and see it as it should be seen. Therefore, according to this, we say, the only antidote for the evil inclination is what? Is the Torah itself. Why? Because we're all conflicted. The only way you could have relevance to be yosher, to rise above your conflicts, which is ego, it's the way I see it and the way you see it, and we're opposed to one another, is only through the Torah. Because since the Torah is yosher, yosher means you're able to transcend above your own physical conflict, your own personal conflicts, only then do you see it correctly. And that's why the Torah itself incapacitates the evil inclination. There's a famous statement of the Zohar, Yisrael v'rais v'kudshu chatu. Yisrael, the Jewish people, Orais means the Torah, and Hashem himself, we're all one entity. Meaning, it's through the Torah do we attach to God. That's how we attach. I mean, the Gemara tells us in Psochim, there's a mitzvah, positive commandment, ubot tidbok. You should cleave to Hashem. So the Gemara asks, Hashem is fire. Could you cleave to fire? It's not possible. So Gemara answers, ubot tidbok means you should have a relationship with Talmidei Chachamim, with Torah sages. Because when you cleave to them, it's the equivalent of you're cleaving to God himself. Because since they possess the Torah and they fully internalize that Torah, attaching yourself to them, accommodating them, providing them with livelihood, so on and so forth, eating and drinking with them, that's like attaching yourself to God. So again, if you attach yourself to a system which is the infinite system, which is perfect and appropriate and fair on the absolute level, what happens to you? You become Yasher. So the evil inclination is a total distortion, a distortion of truth. He presents something which is evil in a positive light. And somehow it allows us to justify it and rationalize. But if you put on that beacon of light, you clearly see what it is. You stay away from it. The Torah itself is the connector. That's how we connect to the perfect system. Once you assume that Yosher, automatically, the evil inclination is incapacitated for that reason. And that's what we're able to understand. The Rechaim HaKodesh explains when we say, I've created the evil inclination, and the Torah is the antidote. That's only Torah Lishma. That's only when you study Torah for the sake of Torah. If you study Torah with an ulterior motive, although you're studying the Torah, it will not incapacitate the evil inclination. But since there's an element of self there, it's for self-interest, which is the Shlo Lishma, which is exactly what the evil inclination is. It's the I, it's the me. Therefore, that somehow doesn't allow the attachment, the full attachment. And therefore, it does not incapacitate the evil inclination. When you study Torah, the Shema, selflessly, for the sake of Hashem, then what is the Torah? You're connecting directly for the sake of God. Then you assume the understanding, the level of Yosher. Once you Yosher, evil inclination has no relevance to your life anymore.